Hi, everybody, and thanks for watching. This is Mike Painovich with the National Justice Party, here to give you the National Justice Party response to the Biden State of the Union address. So for those of you that didn't watch, and I'm sure that's most of you, you don't have to have watched. It wasn't a very interesting speech. It was quite boring, as Joe Biden is known to be. And on top of that, there was social distancing rules. So the room that the speech was given in was pretty empty. The House of Representatives, I believe, only about 1 in 5 of the seats, maybe 1 in 6, were actually occupied. So it was very empty. They didn't, which was a bit of a blessing for those of us that had to watch it, because we did not have these sort of long, interminable rounds of applause, which the State of the Union has become known for in recent years. So that was good on that level. It was also good from the perspective of the DC insider elite, because I read a few editorials in the lead up to this speech in which they said they were happy about the social distancing. They were happy it was going to be a mostly empty room. They were happy it was going to be essentially a dead affair, because they are tired of 4 years of Donald Trump, of everybody being very politically high-strung, of Trump getting everybody's anger up, Trump making people mad, Trump making people happy, Trump rabble-rousing, Trump creating big emotions. They just don't like that, because that creates a kind of an expectation of a different kind of politics, which is one that Washington isn't prepared to deliver. They much rather have a boring, mostly senile old man go up there and deliver a kind of a technocratic speech. Now, when Biden talked about, first he started talking about his COVID response, very predictable. He talked about the success he's had vaccinating people. I don't really have any comment on that part of it, but I did notice that he eschewed talking about economic relief when it came to COVID. He really only focused on, the $1,400 checks. You guys all got your $1,400 checks, as if that was the end all and be all of it. And he kept using this phrase, America is back to move, or something like that. We're back on the move. That's really, are we? But then he moved on from that after focusing, not talking about the economic side of the COVID thing, which the government was atrocious. Both the Biden and the Trump governments were atrocious on this, allowing people to languish, cutting off their $600 a week unemployment, letting people's businesses go under, directing the relief funds in politically motivated directions to NGOs and already rich people and things like that, and not really connecting them in any meaningful way to retaining jobs. This was a sham and a disaster, so it makes sense that Biden would have wanted to move on very fast to not what he's done, but what he's going to do. Now, his next big item was his big infrastructure bill. I've talked about this before. I discussed this in my speech that you can watch from the last meeting that we had on April 10th. Now, this is the big top of the stack item for the Biden administration. This is like their signature legislation that they want to get through. It's kind of like a new deal for America. And there was a few points that Biden was hitting when he was doing this. Now, on the surface, this sounds great. It's high tech. We're gonna upgrade the roads. We're gonna build the bridges. We're gonna put in the broadband internet. We're going to go to Mars. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to have you doing JavaScript on Mars with vaccinations. Like, all kinds of stuff like that was going on. And it sounds good. It's a good idea. And his plan to finance it, so he says, is to tax the very, very top income earners, or really just the richest people, tax capital gains, and tax corporate income tax. And he made the points that these tax rates have actually fallen below the top marginal rate for people who work for a living. And that's true. And that's a disgrace. He mentioned all these companies that don't pay taxes. And he said, if you Republicans don't want to raise taxes on the rich, then who do you want to raise taxes on? Of course, they would object, well, we don't want to do it to anyone. But that's kind of beside the point. The other issue is that the taxation thing isn't really the limiting factor on what the government can and can't do. But I would also agree there is no reason why these extremely rich people and these extremely large concerns shouldn't be paying taxes, particularly when they get a lot of benefits from the government, when they use the government, and when they take advantage of things the government gives them and they don't give anything back to the country or to the people. this makes sense. Now, I don't expect Joe Biden to do this, and I'll tell you why. There was one other piece of economic legislation that he discussed, and that was the $15 minimum wage. He said, let's do it. And I'm like, well, the problem is you can't. You already tried and it failed. And the reason it failed wasn't even because of Republicans. It was because of the guy in your own party that decided to, John McCain style, cross the aisle and suddenly be acting like the other party. Like Joe Manchin, the guy who likes to do TV ads of himself shooting things, perhaps he should have done a TV ad of himself shooting wages. Now, he is a Democrat, and he is the one that sabotaged their $15 minimum wage program, which tells me the Democrats don't really want to do it, but they need to find a plausible way not to do it. And they actually almost broke this with the Joe Manchin thing because it wasn't plausible. The Joe Manchin thing wasn't plausible. He couldn't even tell you why he was against it. This was a kind of a problem for them. That's why I don't trust Biden. Then he says we want to have a bill that's going to guarantee the right of every American to unionize. Now, it's been a very long time since we've actually even heard Democrats talk about that. Now, typically you do expect these progressive sounding stuff out of Democrats, but it's been a long time since they've literally talked about national right to unionization. I didn't even know that this was something that we were discussing. The problem is, again, you're not credible on it. Why aren't you credible on it, Joe Biden? Well, because you have the Jewish CEO incoming to Amazon, Andy Jassy. You have the really overwhelmingly Jewish Biden cabinet. And then you have a failed attempt by blacks, no less, by black workers to unionize down in Alabama that completely flopped. And there was no support from Biden or the administration for them. Maybe, I don't even think they offered rhetorical support. They didn't want to talk about it. Amazon is a notorious union-busting company, and Amazon can do no wrong according to our political elite and political class. So it's not credible that they're going to put on the table anything that is going to require the government legally to help workers fight for unionization. It's not on the table. So again, it's more stuff that Biden is saying to get you excited, but it's not going to happen. One thing that did strike me about this economic portion of the speech was the lack of so-called wokeness, which really means anti-whiteness. Now, there was anti-whiteness, and that comes in later. There was some coded language that Biden used in this portion of the speech where he talked about, what was the term he used? Traditionally overlooked or excluded workers, which is a code for non-whites. He says, those of you who have been traditionally excluded, don't worry. You're not going to be excluded now. The problem I see here is, one, when you actually look at Biden's bill, which on the surface sounds great, the way he wants to finance it sounds great, it's almost like he's ripping off us when he talks about this. Like he feels like he knows we're out there and he's got a cover for what we're saying. Or he doesn't want us or somebody similar to actually take up this ground. So he's got to go out and do it. It sounds good. He's talking a great game. But as we saw with the $15 minimum wage, there's ample people in his own party that are willing to sabotage it. Republicans certainly aren't going to get on board. And on top of that, the actual bill is a racial bill. There are ample provisions in this bill that direct this improvement, these job training, these new high-tech corporate, building electric car jobs and such, specifically at diverse Americans, diverse communities, women of color. There's measures in the bills, at least as it's been proposed, that talks about that. So how are you going to do, Joe Biden? How are you going to do a New Deal when you're waging a race war on the majority of your country? How are you going to do a New Deal when you're so focused on attacking white people? One of the other things Biden said was very interesting. He said, we need to show the world that democracy can accomplish these things. That autocracy, meaning China and Russia, he kept saying they're rushing ahead of us. They're competing and they're getting ahead of us. And it's because nobody thinks democracy, because of the wrangling and how long it takes to get anything done, Nobody has confidence in the system of democracy to deliver these things. And meanwhile, they see that these autocratic countries are actually doing some of this stuff. And that even though they're still behind, generally speaking, on some things to the United States, certainly the economy of China is now in absolute terms larger, and they are rapidly catching up, and they are modernizing, and they are building infrastructure, and they are improving broadband access, and they are doing all of this, and they are employing their people. They are growing their country, and they're doing it with an autocratic regime. But here we are, the United States. Supposedly we are the best in the world. We're supposed to be the leaders by example and blah, blah, blah. And we can't do anything for our people. And he says it's embarrassing. It is embarrassing. It is embarrassing. But the conditions are not there for you to be able to do it. You can't do this, Joe Biden, like leaving aside all the Jewish donors and the dog and pony show of the Joe Manchins and such like that. You simply can't do this if you're waging a race war on your own people, which is what you're doing. So when it came to the foreign policy section of his speech, it was very typical stuff. He as usual, he politicized the idea of terrorism. He accused Iran of being a terrorist, and he also mentioned Al-Qaeda and ISIS hilariously, because as we know, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, I mean, look, and you don't even have to go too far out of the Biden administration. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are projects of the CIA and Mossad. This is well known, and in fact, you don't have to go outside of the Biden administration for the word on this, because right now his national security advisor is the one who, in a leaked email to Hillary Clinton, was saying Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, according to Biden's national security advisor. So then he's going to tell you about Al-Qaeda and ISIS being terrorists? No, he's only saying that because he knows that overwhelmingly the American people hate ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, as far as whether or not people hate Iran, if they do, it's just because they're brainwashed. There's certainly no reason to. I'll tell you who hates Iran is Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and the feeling is mutual. Iran doesn't do terrorism. And there's another group that doesn't do terrorism that was targeted as terrorists in this speech, and that's white people. So after he got finished talking about that in the foreign policy sense, he came back and he said, oh, but don't worry. I'm going to talk about according to our brilliant intelligence agencies, the number one domestic terror threat, which is white supremacy. Now, interestingly, he didn't actually have an example of a white supremacist terror attack that he could call on to back up his point. No. He immediately skipped right to talking about Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. Of course, praising the show trial of Derek Chauvin. But that wasn't a terrorist attack. There's no one that alleges that was a terrorist attack. Some people might describe it that way in hyperbolic terms, but Biden doesn't do that. Democrats don't do that. So what are you doing, Joe Biden? When you say, now I've talked about this ad nauseum. There have been probably 150 some odd mass shootings this year. Last time I checked, it was 147, but that was 2 weeks ago. This year, 2021, so it's definitely over 150 by now. Very small percentage of them have been white. Very small, tiny percentage. Like maybe 10, 12, if that, have been white. None of them have been white nationalists, white supremacists, or anything that could even plausibly be linked to that. One of them was a My Little Pony fan. And not only was he a My Little Pony fan, when the FBI went to investigate him because his mother had called the police because she said he was mentally ill and he needed to be checked out, and the feds went and they looked and they saw that he was not involved in white nationalism. He was not interested in racial politics. And so they dropped the investigation into him. They stopped looking at him. And here he goes and kills 8 people. That is where we are. That is the reality of terrorism. So not only is Joe Biden lying and racially targeting white people when he says that, that's racially targeting you. Okay, make no mistake. It's a mistake. It's not just innocent. It's not just woke cancel culture. It's not some kind of like, oh, he's just saying that. No, he's saying it for a reason. When you get up there and you lie and you say a group of people are terrorists and there's no evidence. In fact, not only is there no evidence, there's like such a lack of evidence. You would actually, but from the data, white nationalists are like the most law-abiding and nonviolent people in the country. Now, that's actually true because we have a political ideology. We do political activism, and we understand that to go out and do exactly what Joe Biden and all of his people desperately want us to do would be a huge mistake. So we're not that stupid. It's not going to happen. But if he's lying about it, and he's lying about it because he wants to politically target white activists, but he also wants to intimidate other white people into staying away from self-advocacy politically. He's blood libeling you, and he's politically targeting you, and he's disenfranchising you. Now, obviously, it's not just him. It's the entire apparatus behind him. But he's the president. He's up there saying it, and it's a lie. So when he says a lie this is like Pinocchio's nose should grow so long for this lie, there is zero evidence this year, last year, any year in recent years of this being some big threat. You would be hard-pressed to find anybody that was doing public violence on behalf of any ideology that was even adjacent to this. You can't really find it. And yet there's this sense that it's there. Why? Well, because the media harps on it. But they don't tell you. If there was anything they could talk about, well, you better believe Joe Biden would have talked about it. But he didn't. He went right to talking about George Floyd. That's all they've got. That's all they've got. So why are they targeting you? I don't believe you're going to do a New Deal to try and help me, Joe Biden, when you get up there and you lie and you call me a terrorist when you don't have any evidence to back that up. Similarly, the Iranians have not done any terrorism to Americans. Iranians never hurt me, never hurt you. So why is he saying it? Because that's the political agenda. Now, it's interesting that he talks about how discredited democracy is. He's right. It is. Because people look at the United States and they're like, what the hell is going on? What is going on with this country? You have the government attacking the majority population. You have anarchists and blacks rioting. You have black violence out of control, spiking to levels that are very close to the worst levels in this history of this country. And they're talking about a literal non-existent threat. You cannot do something progressive for this country if you are waging a racial war against its majority population, which Joe Biden is doing. So I simply don't believe him. I don't believe him. He also, of course, did other, so-called woke stuff. He mentioned transgender kids. We've got your back, kids. Interesting that he's talking about kids, because we're talking about people that don't have the ability to make these decisions from themselves and are oftentimes victims of abuse, or adults that want social status and want to show off that they're very much in line with the elite points of view. And, oh, look, my kid is trans. That's a child that's being abused. But Joe Biden has your back, not to protect you, but to aid and abet your abuser. So that's what's going on with that. Now, the Republican response to this, delivered by Tim Scott, was a joke. It's such a joke, it's almost embarrassing to talk about. I mean, honestly, Tim Scott, why didn't you get up and sing us a Negro spiritual? Why didn't you, actually, pull back the curtain behind yourself or whatever, the backdrop, and have, a bunch of fat black ladies swaying like they're in church, singing the gospel to Jesus? Because that's what you were doing. You were doing a shucking and jiving black minstrel show routine up there. And of course, the Republican response to Joe Biden, instead of any of the actual pretty cutting points that I have made attacking this speech, they don't mention any of it. Now, Joe Biden talked about the Capitol Hill thing. Tim Scott doesn't defend those people. You have people in jail, not on terrorism, trespassing, glorified trespassing charges. Does Tim Scott have anything to say about that? Does any Republicans have anything to say about that? No. Donald Trump doesn't have anything to say about it. No one is sticking up for these people, and they're being racially abused. So right now, Joe Biden, talking about bringing the country together, has a white man in custody who didn't commit any crime except embarrassing Nancy Pelosi, who's being beaten and racially abused in prison. You can't bring the country together when you say that, Mr. Biden. The idea that America can be brought together is increasingly a joke. It is not a credible thing to say. It is a platitude. It is simply there to placate you. It's not something they can do. It's not something they particularly want to do. This is purely rhetoric. And Tim Scott responded, the only way the Republicans know how, Democrats are the real racist. Let me do a black shucking and jiving routine. Let me talk about my mammy and my pappy. Let me do a Negro prayer for you at the end. And also, yeah, there's some people that are kind of abused, but, sometimes there's a certain type of person they call an oppressor. It's not. But who? What kind of person? He won't mention it because he doesn't want to represent you. The GOP doesn't want to represent you. The GOP doesn't take up any of the kinds of positions that I'm taking up. They're there on the table. You can pick them up. You can win. We are a small operation. We just got started. We've been growing our support, but we're a small operation that just got started. These positions that we're taking, you can plagiarize them. To some extent, it seems like some people are. The problem is, nobody trusts you. Your track record is bad. You can't get $15 minimum wage. Your bill to talk about building infrastructure is a racial bill, and you are essentially telling the majority population, I hate you, we hate you, we're not going to do anything for you. This is not your economy anymore. This is not your country. This is for immigrants. This is for non-whites. This is for women of color, blah, 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 all of these groups other than you, whitey. So when you tell me that you're going to do a new deal, it's not credible. In fact, this is just going to be most likely some kind of business as usual, and then we're going to get some corporate subsidies for this or that. I can't predict what it is, but I'll tell you right now, there's going to be another Joe Manchin to spoil your idea of increasing, capital gains and all that stuff. That is sort of typical Democrat stuff, although we haven't heard it in a little while. And as we've heard from some Jewish commentators, they would like the debate between these parties to get centered back where it used to be when Bush and Clinton were going at it over tax and spend Democrat versus like heartless budget cutting conservative and blah, blah, blah. Conservatives are like, oh, free markets, we can't do anything. Free markets will do it. But it's not doing it. Not only is it not doing it, making the market players the only ones that are dominant in certain sectors of life has led to the issues we see with massive employer power as opposed to employees, people having precarity, people feeling like they could get fired, they could lose their livelihood, people not taking political risks, people not even willing to speak their political mind because they literally think they will be fired. Another thing, now, the Republicans like to call this cancel culture. It's much more insidious than that. This is anti-white attack culture. And the Republicans don't want to defend white people. Tim Scott doesn't want to defend white people. So that's where we are. That was the State of the Union. There was a few other things to talk about in there. But generally speaking, that was it. Mainly, Biden infrastructure sounds good. Don't trust them. Foreign policy stuff, Iran, our terrorists, and also white people. Also, transgender kids are great. And then the response from Tim Scott is like, let me tell you about how the Republican Party helped my black family. Also, not to forget criminal justice reform. You want to make sure that he tells you that we had a actually more radical criminal justice reform bill than the Democrats even had. So that is what they feel like talking about. They don't want to talk about you. They don't want to talk about your interests. They don't want to stick up for you. They don't want to stick up for whites. They don't want to stick up for the Capitol protesters. They don't want to call out the Biden administration on the place where they are weakest, which is the clear and brazen anti-whiteness of the administration. And the Republicans don't want to take up that ball and run with it, which is why we're here. So if you want to know what we're about, you can go and check out our 25-point program, our platform that lays out our ideas. And unlike either of these people, we actually mean it. We would do it. We are legitimate outsiders from this system. You might say, look, you look at you guys, you're a small time outfit. But here's the thing. If they're out there talking the kinds of things that we're talking about, it's because they know something that maybe other people don't know. They know that this stuff is popular. They know this is what you want. They also know they're not going to give it to you. So I'll tell you one way to make sure that you never get what you want out of this government, and that's to keep supporting Democrats or Republicans. Either because you believe that they're going to do something one way or the other, or because you're so worried about the other side that you keep voting for them. That way they never have to do anything. If these people aren't challenged, if they're not challenged by an outside credible force, this will just get worse. It's just going to continue. You won't get your progressive legislation. You'll get more tranny stuff and less progressive legislation. More capitalism, more trannies, more wars. All of the above. If you want an actual alternative, if you want to actually chart your own political destiny, which is what we're about, you have to go outside of the system that they're setting up.